So I have made a very interesting discovery, a power rating between these three cards, Mystic Remora being the weaker of the three, Esper Sentinel being stronger than Mystic Remora, and Rhetoric Study obviously being the strongest. Now I want to point out that my findings isn't going to indicate that you should cut Mystic Remora from your decklist. I still think it's an 100% auto-include if you have the color identity of blue. But there is a very good takeaway from this video that we're going to get to. But first I should obviously explain how I came to this discovery. So I have been watching cEDH gameplay videos taking notes on what cards they are playing, like for example that Tuna, who is winning the turn count, but also how many cards, for example that Rhetoric Study over there, drew through the entire match. I currently have 228 games recorded this way. And here we have a game 121 from the channel, One Mana Floating, the date, the players, and the player that won. It happened to be player 4, and the turn it was over, and the win con in this case was the One Ring, as the One Ring basically drew 10 cards. Here on the card section we can see what cards were put onto the stack throughout the match. So we have the deck list of all the entire cards in there optional, but here are the ones that were actually played. In comment we can read Mystic Remora :4, meaning that in this game player 1 played a Mystic Remora, as we can see here in cards, there's the Mystic Remora, and it drew 4 cards for this person. Over here we have a Rhetoric Study that drew 5 cards. And we also have a Gemstone Caverns as a pre-game effect, by the way. Now what we can actually do with this is basically ask how many of those Mystic Remoras that appeared inside card were the winning player. So we have a total of 87 games, and from those we have 34 in winning position and 70 in a losing position. Now you're a smart person, so you're gonna do some math and put together 34 plus 70 reaching 104. So the total games should be 104. However, the thing is that in games you have 4 players, so there's a chance that there's gonna be from 1 to 4 potential Mystic Remoras appearing in one single game. So the verdict is that among my 228 tour games, we have 104 Mystic Remoras that have been put onto the stack, and from that they have achieved an average win rate of 32.69, with a very strong P statistic. If we actually look at Esper Sentinel, we see a improved win rate. It's winning more. It's less popular though, like people are playing it a little bit less compared to Mystic Remora, but still. Then we have Rhetoric Study, which has a win rate of 35.16. And we can continue this by looking at the One Ring and even Sol Ring as well. Sol Ring is, as you can see, quite popular. I mean, it's an auto-include and it's inside every color identity, so it appears quite frequently. Now the difference between Esper Sentinel and Mystic Remora isn't that large. They are comparing fairly equal, but we can be a little bit more specific in this and find a better detail of who is stronger between these two by putting them into an arm wrestling competition, basically. What we have here are 17 games where Mystic Remora and Esper Sentinel appeared in that game, but in different positions. Let me explain. So either Mystic Remora is a winner or a loser when Mystic Remora is in the other position, and the same thing with Mystic Remora, vice versa. And from those 17 games, you can see up there that Esper Sentinel have won 52.94%, while Mystic Remora have won 47% basically. So when Mystic Remora and Esper Sentinel appears in a game on opposite position, Esper Sentinel just accidentally happens to win a little bit more. And by the way, we are excluding Esper Sentinel and Mystic Remora from the vice versa position. So in this case, the Esper Sentinel, the group with 52% from the 17, never had a Mystic Remora in play, never put that onto the stack basically. And the same thing for Mystic Remora against Esper Sentinel, yeah. But of course there is a problem. There are other cards that are going to interfere with the statistics, because when you're testing something as simple as an arm wrestling competition, you're testing the strength of one person's arm versus another person's arm, and there's very little interference in that kind of competition. Similar thing with running. You put a bunch of people onto a line, they run as fast as they can, the one that reaches the goal first is the fastest sprinter. Very simple thing to test. But in Magic there are cards that are going to do a similar thing, like Thrasios, Tymna, Civil Library, The Wandering, and Rhystic Study, that could destroy the statistics of what I've just illustrated. But we can easily fix this by simply just excluding a bunch of cards. So let's begin by excluding Rhystic Study. Take a look up there. We're going from 17 to 15. Take a look at the percentage. It is increasing in the favor of Esper Sentinel. In other words, there were 2 games here that a Rhystic Study appeared on the Mystic Remora position, helping that person out. So in this game, there were no Rhystic Studies whatsoever that appeared in the game to fiddle with the statistics, and we can keep climbing. For example, let's do the One Ring. Now we went from 15 down to 12, and the win rate increased a tiny bit further, and then we can do it even more by adding the Sol Ring in here. Now the total games is down to 8, so we can't really truly trust potentially this statistics, because the sample size is starting to be very small, but I'm showcasing an indication basically, and a pattern. I mean, it's only gotten better the more cards we have been excluding. In other words, we're now starting to isolate Mystic Remora versus Esper Sentinel, and we're starting to see a pattern that Esper Sentinel is performing better. So if one person is playing Esper Sentinel and the other person is playing Mystic Remora, according to statistics, what I found, it appears that Esper Sentinel has a better chance of winning that specific match. We could obviously also do this with Rhystic Study, putting Rhystic Study versus Esper Sentinel and doing the same exclusion, but this time we're excluding Mystic Remora. And obviously you can see up there, Rhystic Study is performing quite well versus Esper Sentinel. We can also fiddle with other combinations as well. For example, here we have one group with Esper Sentinel and Sol Ring versus Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study. In this case, we have 11 games where one position had both Sol Ring and Esper Sentinel in play, while the other position had both Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study in play, while excluding the other options. And from that, the Esper Sentinel Sol Ring is apparently stronger than Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. But, I mean, on the other hand, we did see a very good promise from Sol Ring's performance in general as well. Now, this might sound a little bit strange, like, why is Esper Sentinel better than Mystic Remora? And I've actually found a pretty good indication in the statistics as well. If you remember, we were specifically taking a look at the draw rate. So Rhystic Study here drew 5 cards, Mystic Remora here drew 4 cards. And we can pull data from that. So we have 2 arrows here. We have winning player, we have losing player, and we have a total of games, and we have a total draw value from how many cards Mystic Remora drew on average in a game. And as you can see here, among the winning players, it drew 5.15 cards average in a game, while in a losing position it drew more. The reason for that is actually quite simple. When you are putting a Mystic Remora in play, you're usually passing the turn, someone goes to their turn with their Adnos or Underworld Breach, and they start feeding the Mystic Remora. The Mystic Remora draws a lot of cards but doesn't draw into counterspells, and then the Underworld Breach or Adnos wins with their Fastest Oracle, and that is bumping up the card draw statistics for Mystic Remora while losing. Now, if we start to compare this with like Esper Sentinel, we have a higher draw rate on the winning position, but a smaller draw rate in the losing position, where it was vice versa for the Mystic Remora. We can obviously, of course, look at a heuristic study that has an amazing draw rate in the winning position and a smaller but still pretty high draw rate in the losing position, because it still suffers the kind of same problem with Mystic Remora. You cast heuristic study, you pass turn, someone goes to their turn, Adnos, Underworld Breach, Storm, you draw a lot of cards, you don't draw into Force Wills, and the Underworld Breach Adnos wins with that fast as Oracle again. But there is one more thing that is actually quite important regarding the very low draw rate on Mystic Remora. You see, this card is on paper costing you 1 blue pip, but it actually costs more. With cumulative upkeep, you are forced to pay for it continuously throughout the entire match, meaning it's actually preventing you from playing proactive. Proactive means that you are the person that is doing actions to put pressure onto the game. When you're putting Mystic Remora into play and basically paying for it every single turn, you are preventing yourself from being proactive, instead sitting back and being reactive. And by the way, being proactive is the recommended position to be in general inside this multiplayer free-for-all format. When it comes to these two, you are allowed, or it doesn't actually prevent you in any form of case of being proactive. You pay the cost, the 1 white pip, or the free mana for heuristic study, and then just lean back. You've done your payment, there's no taxes on this thing, so from the rest of the game you can just continue with your game plan while these two are drawing cards for you. They are actually helping you being proactive, while in Mystic Remora's case it's actually hurting you, creating a different game plan compared to what is in general recommended. In other words, a takeaway from this video could be that if you have both of these cards in your hand, turn 1 should be Burst of Paradise and turn 2 should be Mystic Remora. This allows you to have 2 mana always at the ready while still paying the upkeep cost potentially for the fish. But another thing from now this is just my personal experience now, I've been watching a lot of games and I've been playing with Mystic Remora myself quite a lot. I have noticed that, or well, I think we can all agree, that the longer the game goes, the more spells are usually being casted. If you're playing a Mystic Remora turn 1, you might draw from 1, 2, 3 cards in that turn cycle, and usually by this point people are sending their Remora to the graveyard. And that is why it has a very low draw rate in a winning position in general, because people that are winning with Mystic Remora usually don't have it in play when they are winning. They stop paying for it, because after a while they have a huge hand size, they want to do stuff. But take this into consideration, and I think this is very important. I think a lot of players should actually start doing this a little bit more. Cast Mystic Remora, or make sure you have it in play when you're going to storm off, when you are going to force a counter war. Because your opponents are going to cast counterspells trying to interact with you, meaning that when you are putting your win con on the stack, you're going to draw cards through the counter war, drawing into more interaction that can help you win your counter war, or maybe draw into alternative combos so you can pivot. One thing I think is very recommended is that you are trying to combo off and win in response to the cumulative upkeep cost. So if you can win in instant speed, you untap, before you draw a card, before you're going to pay for that thing, you start trying to win. You have basically now skipped the entire cumulative upkeep cost payment, but you still have the fish in play, allowing you to draw cards when you are trying to win. Very few people are doing this, and I think Mystic Remora would be better used if more people did it. Instead of just slam dunking this thing turn 1 and then sacrificing it like turn 2 or turn 3. And those are some explanations why Esper Sentinel is a little bit better, or showcasing a little bit better win rate compared to the fish. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you learned something cool from it. I will be vigilant and try to gather more data so we can see more potential power ratings between various cards. These are popular cards and they were kinda easy to accumulate some data on from a small sample set. The p-values were still very strong, so we have a good indication that this is something to potentially believe. But with more data we will see better updates and see if this sticks true. Like I showcased, when we were starting to exclude a lot of cards, the sample size started to drop quite drastically, but we still saw a pretty good pattern of what potentially could be really true. In any case guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.